Okay, so I'm casting on 9 stitches. I'm just ignoring that frayed end for the moment, and we'll pick that up later. And you can see that I'm just going into nearly the top. It doesn't have to be exactly the most top one, it could be the next one down, just somewhere near the top there. And I'm using about 1 inch between stitches. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so there are my 9 stitches. Now I'm going to turn around and start knitting them. Now this first row, you can see that the stitches are on back to front. So I'll be knitting into the back of the stitches just for this first row only, then I'll go back to knitting normally. So I just put my needle into the back of the stitch, I open out the netting a little bit and just hook the top part onto the needle, slide off as normal into the back of the stitch. The first row is a little bit awkward until you get established, and you'll get a little bit of a rhythm of how you work with the net. Just holding onto the stitches pretty carefully because they're quite loose. Until the knitting gets a bit established, they can easily slide off. So just keep a good grip on those. Now the stitches, the guide is for them to be 1 inch apart. If you don't know what 1 inch is, then I suggest you get a measure and just refer to that, because if you do the stitch larger than 1 inch and you do that consistently, your scarf will end up shorter. So you probably don't want it any shorter, and if you did want a longer scarf, you could also just cast on less stitches. So instead of having 9, I've had some ladies do 5 stitches and the scarf has worked out probably nearly half as narrow but almost twice as long. Now for this very last stitch on the first row, to save us having to sew all this end in later, what I like to do is sort of put my needle into the stitch but then also just hook on a couple of those scraggly ends, just complete the stitch as normal, and then once you get a few more rows and a few more frills, you won't even see that end there. Okay, so we've done the first row, all the stitches are on the needle in the normal way now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, and now we just go to knitting normally. The first stitch will be a bit harder because we've got all of those ends in there. And what you'll find is there's just one extra step to knitting with this yarn, and that is you put your needle in the yarn, you open out the ribbon, and then you hook the stitch on and complete the stitch. So needle in, open out the yarn and hook the top end. You don't have to open the yarn out to its full extent, as long as you just open up the top part so that you can hook the stitch on. Later on, once you've done the scarf, you can just pull all the frills out to the full extent later on. So your knitting doesn't have to be perfect. That's one good thing about this scarf, you know, just as long as it's roughly right, it's going to end up looking fantastic. Looks a bit awkward. Once you do a few rows, you'll get into the rhythm. And then about 3 hours later, you'll have your scarf. There we go, there's another row. And you can see that when you're pulling out the frill a little bit more, it's already looking pretty great. And that's it.